I think the vast majority of developers, at least traditionally, have wanted to stay away from CMS development. The core thing that we wanted to achieve with Sanity was something that both editors and developers would want to work with. But in some cases, you actually want the full control of a user interface in terms of like how the editing should work. If something works just as you want it to, you don't even think about it.
Hello, Internet. Welcome back to the Code and Content Podcast, the podcast for conversations at the intersection of code and content. Today's episode features one of Sanity's very own OGs, Espen, who has been here the whole time building a CMS so that you don't have to. I think every developer probably has had to build a CMS or something like it at some point in time. Espen's been doing that for years now so that we all benefit from a code configuration-based CMS in the Sanity studio, and that's just one part of the platform, as we all know. So really enjoyed picking his brains because I get to say a lot of things and I get to be the spokesperson a lot of the time for this product, but it's folks like Espen who are really doing the actual hard work, and I like to hear what's happening on their side of the fence. So without any further run-on, let's hand the stage over to Espen.
Thanks for joining me on the Code and Content Podcast today.
Thank you.
So you've been with Sanity since the very beginning?
Yes.
Or extremely early?
Yeah.
And so you've been instrumental in building the Sanity Studio, the CMS part of the platform.
Yeah.
I like to think about this because there's this irony in that we want people to use Sanity Studio instead of building their own CMS. But the irony is that Sanity came from an agency who decided to build their own CMS.
Yeah.
So in effect, we are building everybody else's CMS for them. Do you have any sort of broad strokes thoughts with that as the platform of like, what is it like? What is life like to build everybody's CMS?
It's fun. It's not the kind of thing that is very glamorous. I think everyone, or maybe not everyone, but I think the vast majority of developers, at least traditionally, have wanted to stay away from CMS development. But quite often you find yourself, or at least found yourself back in the day, kind of building like a mini CMS for your particular use case. Or you would take, a CMS off the shelf and want to customize it in a way, but, with varying degrees of success.
Yeah, I think every developer's got some experience building a CMS or CMS-like experience for sure. So what then do you remember sort of being the reason why Sanity considered it was like the options that were out there weren't good enough and we had to build our own CMS?
Yeah. I think the thing that was lacking out there was something that really was able to express the content model that you wanted, but still didn't compromise on sort of the user interface and the way that you could customize that CMS. So there were either like these very rigid content management systems that allowed you to take something that was built for maybe like a blog and then sort of like bastardize it in a way and make it fit your content model, like kind of. But then you rarely got sort of the APIs to work with that in the way that you wanted to. And sometimes the user interface was also like really lacking. Or you could go the approach of like, there were a couple of products that had sort of like the ability to model really complex schemas. But you had to do those through like click and like UI based like schema builders. Sometimes you didn't get quite the model you wanted. And then on the other end of that, you didn't always necessarily have the best APIs for actually interacting with that anyway.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, that schema was like that reflected what you got out in terms of the user interface for the editor, and so there was no way to sort of like make it look less generic.
Yeah. And it strikes me that this is, even though we're talking mostly about Sanity Studio, what you've just mentioned is only possible by taking Sanity Studio and adding portable text and adding Grok and adding an image CDN. So there's all these extra parts as well. It wasn't just the CMS, like it's not just an admin panel that writes to a dashboard, writes to a database, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main like components that set Sanity a bit apart was like we could have made it for like an existing database, but then you would probably also have a very limited functionality, or you would,
we had the same functionality as everybody else. Yeah. So we're dreaming just a bit bigger, and so needed to have those other technologies developed and then added as well. So that makes sense. Did you have experience building CMSs like in earnest before building Sanity Studio, or was it sort of just more of those smaller
in
dashboard admin apps?
it was definitely smaller admins, smaller UIs. I used to work at a media company where we had a ton of like short-lived projects, and some were longer term as well. But we kept making like these bespoke tools for those particular ones, and they all had like varying degrees of bugs and slightly different behaviors. And
Yeah. And then they're difficult to work across. It's kind of reminds me of back when I was doing web development, was that before we used Tailwind, every project was using its own set of utility classes.
Yeah.
They were all named differently. So if you're having to reinvent the wheel on every new project, then they all start, they're similar in some ways and different in others. So I can see how that would be a pain. What had to be created from scratch then that's easier now? Because I think about things like multiplayer editing. Like that was quite novel back when it was 7, 8 years ago. I should do my research. But I imagine the technology is advanced from now. How much stuff did we have to build from scratch that today is potentially some other service that you could just plug and play?
There's a couple of things that comes to mind. Like we built this presence indication system to tell people where in the system people are and who's online, kind of
So
thing.
like if you and somebody else are in the same document, that you get to see their indicator.
Yeah. That seems like it's kind of a solved problem. There's a lot of frameworks out there now. There's even like companies doing that as like their business model. Of course, there's like benefits of us making it ourselves because we can deeply integrate it into like, so the security systems and potentially use that information in other ways. In terms of the multiplayer editing, it's an interesting. It would be easy to take a look at the like landscape right now and think that that is a solved problem. But I think for our particular use case is actually like still quite complicated because there's all these libraries out there that does like CRDTs as like a big thing now, or like conflict-free replicated data types. And not having conflicts is great, but that doesn't mean that you won't have behavioral changes that doesn't make sense. Like it only guarantees that two clients end up in the same state at the end of the day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if like one person removes an element in a list and another one tries to write some text in there, like what should actually happen.
Yeah.
And for a product like Sanity, we want like history. We want to like be able to say who did what. We want like deep integration into security, like fine-grained permissions. There's all kinds of like behavior that makes it like slightly more complex for us. But it would certainly be nicer to maybe build something today, potentially like on top of those technologies that have appeared since we started.
Sure. So it's not as simple as thinking that just because Sanity Studio started 7 or 8 years ago, you could just plug a bunch of things together. There's actually deeper levels to it than that.
Yeah, especially if you want it integrated into the stack. Like we are a platform more than just the CMS, and so that means that we want like the full power of integrating it with all of the components on the platform, and that's harder to do with like something off the shelf usually.
Yeah. What do you think of the elements that make a good content management system? Like I know I've discussed like the needs that were behind needing to build Sanity Studio in the beginning, but some of the theme of these particular episodes I want to record is that I think developers are too quick to not really think about the needs of authors. How much do you think about or care about the craft of creating an experience that people would like authoring content inside of?
Yeah, I think that was like the core thing that we wanted to achieve with Sanity was something that both editors and developers would want to work with. Because I feel like those tended to be like either or sometimes neither. But
Yeah, heavily skewed towards developers typically.
yeah, and so like while we did make it like very intentional that we wanted this to be like a developer set this up and you were able to like customize it any way you want as a developer. I think that also goes to the editor's benefit because you get a really good like user interface off just like from scratch. But then what we found, at least in my experience using or building all of these mini CMSs, if you can call it that, is the benefit of them was that you could really tailor make them for like that particular use case, and you can make like a workflow feel intuitive to an editor. And I feel like that is like kind of what Sanity delivers on in terms of the customizability, and also what we'll be like continuing to build towards that goal of making something that like any kind of content should be easy to edit and work with without like being frustrated about the user interface.
Yeah. This is making me think I really should have planned when this episode's coming out so we could start talking about more interesting things. This will come out after the May 8th release. So all of what we're about to talk about, which I didn't have on my list today, but you bring it up, I think we should be safe to talk about it. So the Sanity Studio has always been this like all-encompassing self-contained application that you could configure in most ways, and you could customize in some ways, but there's still a bunch of like little behaviors that it had that were difficult to replicate, right? We're now extracting those things into React hooks with an app SDK allows you to build literally anything because the very primitives of how the studio works are now in your hands, and that feels like the final form of the idea. Is that sort of how you see that next evolution of building apps?
At least in the future, I like we will be working towards that goal. And so, yeah, being able to write kind of apps that are even more bespoke than a studio is, because a studio is, as you say, like you get a base experience and then you sort of customize parts of it. But in some cases, you actually want like the full control of the user interface in terms of like how the editing should work. And also just like presenting content in a different way. Sometimes it's not, you don't want it in that very like list-based form, but
Right,
rather.
navigate a whole CMS. Maybe you just want a particular view of particular documents in a particular
Exactly.
way.
Yeah. And so I think the SDK will allow you to do that, where or make it as easy as possible to create those experiences, basically, and also make them sort of distributable. So like you can package up a solution for a particular sort of use case and ship that off as kind of an app instead of like a piece of the studio necessarily.
No, that's very cool. You mentioned before about I can't remember the words you used exactly, but it was like a labor of love to continue working on something for this long. Version 3 has been out for what, 2 or 3 years at this point? It feels like. I think we just released 3.86 this week, like 86 minor versions of this. I think most developers would enjoy sort of burning the thing down and starting over again. How does it feel to like maintain a piece of software for this long? Like, there must be a lot of legacy, but then it's quite solid in so many ways. Like, how does it feel to work on something for so long?
It's interesting. I feel like you kind of, you get blind to some parts of it. Like you get so used to seeing your product work in a certain way that things just become sort of like second nature. And it's always refreshing to kind of see new users use the product and be like, oh yeah, that thing still needs work, or like that thing would be nice to fix.
Or that thing's still great. It's just normal to me. And yeah, when someone
Yeah.
the first time, it's amazing.
Unfortunately, that isn't as easy to like recognize, because if something works just as you want it to, you don't even think about it.
Yeah, it is right.
Oh, yeah. So, but it's fun, being able to work on things and like improve things over time. And it's good to see like the community pick up some of the new features that are released and like really appreciate it for all the hard work that went into it.
How often do you have the urge to think though, gee, I'd love to burn this thing down and just V4 new product right now, or is like because V3 was a rewrite in a large way, do you still have sort of scars from that you don't want to go down that path again?
We definitely don't want as big of like a disruption as we had from V2 to V3. Like that upgrade path could have been a lot better, or it could have been a lot better, but it was difficult.
Significant anyway.
Yes,
But
yeah. But there's certainly things that I would love to tear down. Things like the structure builder API, it keeps coming back to haunt me, like years and years after.
sorry, I'm probably responsible for a number of those complaints. So
Yeah, that's fine. No, but it's So some of these things we can actually make changes over time with and keeping them backwards compatible. So those are great. And then there's the things that come back to haunt us as like we can't actually change something, or it's harder to build a product because of decisions we made,
Yeah.
years and years ago. And that's frustrating in some ways because you have to really like spend a lot of time trying to figure out like how can we continue down this path while making sure that we're not leaving anyone behind that rely on this particular functionality.
Yeah.
And so like, some features are like heavily requested, but you might know that, introducing that feature might like significantly reduce the like the performance of the system.
Yeah. Cascading side effects that
Yeah.
you're aware of, but
Yep.
might not seem intuitive. But it is impressive though too. Like if you look at v3.0.0, like it looks very different to what the studio
Mhm.
looks like now. And so there's still been like so much significant work done in those 86 versions. Just because there hasn't been a breaking change doesn't mean that the product's not significantly different,
Yeah. Yeah.
even if the structure builder API is still the same.
Yeah.
And on that, there's a question I like asking engineering because I don't hold back for feature requests. If you think you make feature requests of Sanity, I might have you covered. How does it feel to have someone come? Why can't you just change this? Or wouldn't it be nice if it did that? Sort of,
Mhm.
what's the knee jerk reaction that gets felt on the other side of the fence when I lob those over, or you see GitHub issues reported where
Yeah.
you're looking for feature requests?
I think generally we love to see feature requests.
Mm.
I mean, it's always nice to see sort of like what people like. People love it already, but they have special needs, and then the hard part is like balancing. It's very tempting to go and jump on some of those because if you really agree with a feature, like, oh yeah, that would be amazing to have, then yeah, it's super tempting to like drop what you're doing and go and chase that. But there's overall priorities, and then there's the considerations that needs to be taken into account. Like I said, like what is this? How will this affect performance? Will this make the system like more complex to maintain over time?
Yeah.
And is it the right abstraction is also a question
Yeah,
that often comes up. Like maybe you implement a feature and then 2 weeks after release, you realize, oh, that actually shares a lot of similarities with this other thing. What we should have done is like co-locate.
Yeah, and now you've made a decision that, and now it has of technical challenges ahead of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's cool. So is there anything sort of that people underappreciate then about the life of a CMS maintainer that perhaps you share, or any particular insights you might have come along on the journey?
Um, it's a tough job to make everyone happy, but I think our model of building a toolkit is, I think people do appreciate it, and I think
Yeah.
people will open their eyes to it more as with the new stuff that's coming out or has already come out.
Has it already come out?
Yeah. And yeah, I'm excited to see what people build with that going forward.
Yeah.
There's so much more that I would love to show and talk about that will make people's lives a lot easier as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping people can really get inspired by what they'll be able to build now, because it's one thing to configure the studio, but to go and build your own whole thing that works like the studio does or works in harmony with the studio,
Yeah.
I think it's pretty exciting. So yeah, I think that covers it. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.